Welcome to Freedom is a Constant Struggle here on SF Live with your host, Kilu Nyasha, and engineer, Aaron Doherty. Tonight's program will focus on the housing crisis and homelessness with our guest, Jennifer Friedenbach, Executive Director of the Coalition on Homelessness, San Francisco, for 12 years, where she works as an organizing director, substance abuse and mental health work group coordinator, and fundraiser. Prior to coming to San Francisco, Jennifer was director of the Hunger and Homeless Action Coalition of San Mateo County. Jennifer currently sits on San Francisco 10-year Implementation Council, is a former member of the local Homeless Coordinating Board, and was a founding member of the Treatment on Demand Planning Council. She has a long history of community organizing and has worked on a range of poverty-related issues, including welfare rights, housing, homeless prevention, health care, disability, and human and civil rights. Ms. Friedenbach has authored several reports for the Coalition on Homelessness, including Shelter Shock, Housing First for Families, Locked Out, and more. She is also a tireless advocate for a fair city budget as founding member of the People's Budget Collaborative, a group dedicated to redirecting city funding towards ending poverty in San Francisco. In about 10 minutes, we'll open our live line, 621-4473 on the screen, for any questions you might have. Thank you very much for joining us. Jennifer, welcome to Freedom is a Constant Struggle.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Why don't we begin by talking about the coalition itself?
Okay. So the Coalition on Homelessness has been around for about 20 years, and we basically pull together homeless people with frontline service providers and community folks to try to create permanent solutions to homelessness. At the same time, we fight to preserve the civil and human rights of people forced to remain on the streets. So what we do is we identify gaps in services, create new programs, push for new policies, do all kinds of a whole realm of things. And we've been able to, in 20 years, accomplish a lot, considering it's a very small grassroots organization. So the result of our work has been hundreds of units of affordable housing. It's been hundreds of people being able to have access to treatment that they didn't have before. We've done these very dramatic system reforms, completely changed the way people access mental health treatment in San Francisco, and really increase the due process rights that people have in these various systems. And so, we just keep fighting and keep moving on to try to, our ultimate goal, of course, is to try to end homelessness. And we're going to keep working towards that.
Right on. And what are the national figures now on homelessness approximately?
Well, there's over 3 million people that are without a home, men, women, and children. Probably the fastest growing segment is families with children. What we have is a situation where basically a whole bunch of different very bad policy decisions that this country has made has led to the very dramatic number of people that we see on the streets. And so, bringing it back to the Great Depression, we put a lot of things in place. Protections for folks, kind of created some kind of safety net, invested heavily in housing, and then in 1978 we really started to reverse things, especially on the housing front. So we saw this huge drop in housing funding, and at the very bottom in 1983 of that funding, the very first shelter opened up in San Francisco. And since then, for the past 25 years, we've been continuing, as a society to make incredibly bad decisions. And so we end up with this really very stark contrast where we have a very affluent society and then this huge disparity where we have really severe poverty, poverty so severe that we have over 3 million people that are actually living without a home. So we don't see this in other westernized countries, and it's really unique in the United States.
It certainly is. And I understand that the HUD budget, the Housing for Urban Development Department, was slashed something like $45 billion a year since 1979.
Yeah, it's been, I think, I think the cumulative is 300 and some odd billion. It's huge. It's about 74% cuts cumulatively over the past 2.5 decades, and this crossed Republicans and Democrats alike. Yeah, so they all decided they were going to get out of the housing business and continue to slash it. But of course, this intersected with a couple other things that were going on. We had a change in our economy, shift over to service sector, where people were paid lower wages and weren't getting health benefits. We pulled back on a lot of our income programs. A lot of people lost their disability, and disability hasn't kept up with inflation. We haven't bothered to really, in a realistic way, raise our minimum wage to a place that makes sense. We've welfare for families has been dropped about 25% if you count inflation. So all these different things are really hitting poor people, and and
now we have the home mortgage crisis, and the weakening dollar, and the housing crisis is worsening as a result of what is really a recession, and it's really a depression for many of us already, and I understand that you would think that with this crisis, rents might drop, but they're actually escalating. The average rent, in fact, today's Chronicle had an article on rents in the Bay Area, and San Francisco rents have increased 14.4% and are now up to average rent $2,326 a month. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, it's really shocking, and that's, I think, it's very counterintuitive. You would think if the economy goes down that there would be some respite, that the rents would start dropping, and they're not, and continuing to rise. The pressure on folks is very intense, and so when people lose their housing, we continue to have evictions in San Francisco at pretty alarming numbers. It's really difficult to get back into housing. We're pushing poor people out of the city and kind of, gentrifying San Francisco in a way that I think is really bad in all areas, whether we're talking about the environment, the economy, just in terms of having a decent place to live that is full of, vibrant diversity that people think of around San Francisco. So.
The black population has decreased something like 20% in San Francisco over the last few decades.
Yeah, I think it's gone from 14% to 6% in just since the late 80s. So it's pretty dramatic, and there was a lot of forces on that. And so these are the things. But so, poor people have some poor people have the at least a little bit of privilege to move out of town and maybe move somewhere that there's cheaper rents. A lot of folks don't have that privilege and are staying here and are on either doubling up with other folks, squeezing into single room occupancy hotels, staying in our shelters.